Hey everybody, and welcome to another week of The VUU. In a moment, we'll introduce very special guests, one of whom is having a little bit of tech problem. So I'll start by saying this is Meg Riley here in Minneapolis. It is a gorgeous fall day here, and I woke up happy in part because we had a county hearing here last night about renaming what has been Lake Calhoun and renaming it Bide Makaska, which is the Dakota name, the original name for it. And Calhoun, I'll just say, is a Unitarian, big old racist, horrible with the Native Americans. And so it's really exciting to get rid of this bit of history. And I'll say that the Universalist Church, which is really near this lake, has been really active in this movement. So I'm delighted with their activism. And the hearing last night was overwhelmingly in favor of the name change, though of course the paper is covering all the people who weren't, but it was overwhelmingly in favor of it. So I woke up happy today. How are you, Aisha?
Hi, I'm Aisha Hauser in Seattle. I'm good. And as I was saying before we went on air, we are right now under the big dark. It is a cloud mass and rain mass that started in China. So I invite people to Google it because it is quite odd and darker than usual for Seattle. And I'm feeling good. I led a white, go ahead, what?
So it's like being in a really dark rainstorm, kind of?
It's like being in a really dark rainstorm. Yeah, and supposedly it started yesterday and it's gonna last. So my husband, I thought, and I don't know what I was reading, I said, this is gonna be here for months. He goes, are you insane? It's gonna be here for 5 days. So I don't know, 5 days, 3 months. It'll be, maybe I was just getting, I don't know, it's my mood, I suppose, because of what's going on nationally. But, and I led a white supremacy teach-in last Sunday. So that was exciting in not in my congregation, a different congregation in West Seattle. So I'm feeling good.
And that went well?
It went, I think it went well. It was multi-generational. I worked hard to plan it, and I read readings from James Baldwin and Angela Davis and Duro Farrar and me. Not that I'm putting myself in league with James Baldwin and Angela Davis, but, and then I did a children's story, and I read the reflections and invited people to talk to each other. I got positive feedback, so I'm going to go by that. And the minister and religious educator who were there seemed very pleased and gave me good feedback. So I think it went well.
Yay. We're proud to have one of the starters of that whole movement here as one of our hosts on The VUU.
Thank you.
Michael Tino, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. This is Michael Tino joining you from Peekskill, New York, where I think fall has maybe finally arrived. Summer hung on about a month later than it should have, but we're going to get used to nutty weather like that, right? So, but things are okay here. Nothing spectacular to report. We're actually getting set this weekend. The 5 congregations in Westchester County, New York, are doing a 5-way pulpit exchange, and all of the ministers are talking about environmental racism. So we're all taking on the same topic in each other's congregations, which is pretty interesting. And then I'll follow that up with our own version of the teach-in next week. So my congregation is going to get 2 different perspectives, but it's actually pretty fun that we're working together like this.
Way cool. And on tech today, as always, we have Jessica Starrocker. Jessica, anything you want to say?
No, I'm also in the big dark, which I'm just learning about. And yeah, I'll have to Google that when this call is over.
Behind you, it looks darker than usual. Well, of course, it's dark out there, isn't it?
You can't tell at this time of day, but we'll wait and see what happens.
And you'll be on Twitter. And Jessica also, if you're watching this and you write comments or questions, Jessica will be bringing those in for all of us. Today, I'm delighted to say that my co-host Michael Tino is going to hold down the fort. So Michael, I'm going to, with that, turn it over to you to introduce our guests, one of whom has disappeared, but hopefully we'll be back.
Well, we are thrilled and excited to welcome to the VUU today the co-moderators of our Unitarian Universalist Association. Elandria Williams joining us, who is here, and Mr. Barb Greve, who is having some technical difficulties and will be here momentarily. Barb has popped in and out and is trying to get his video to work so we can all see his beautiful face in addition to hearing the wonderful things that he has to say. So good morning, Elandria.
Good morning, Michael.
Where are you joining us from today? I know that you are my very busiest friend. So so I never know where you're gonna be whenever I talk to you.
Yes, we're in the world of Elandria. Today, I'm in the Student Center at the University of Colorado. Since with Highlander, we did a Highlander workshop with the community writing conference, we did a free conference. So I'm in the Student Center at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Nice. And you've just finished up a big board meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We just had our board retreat. Oh, and Barb's here.
Excellent. And Barb is here. Mr. Barb Greve, hopefully we can hear you. Are you muted? You're a little blue person down at the bottom of the screen.
Barb was a Lego head. We've moved from head to blue person.
But we could at least hear the Lego head talk, and we can't hear the blue person.
Maybe when Barb comes in Elandria, can you say what you do at Highlander? You do everything, as far as I can tell. And you've been there a long time.
Yes, I've been there 11 years. And I got there at 27. Now I'm 38. And so now most of what I do help coordinate with Susan Williams, our economics and governance program. And so it's everything from a curricula to helping do a project called Beautiful Solutions, which is a book and a website and curriculum. And I also do a lot of grant writing, and we're about to put up rural broadband all over the South and rural spaces around the country. So do that and help do business planning and a lot of varied and sundry things, including like, I do a lot. But yeah, which is good. It's fun to not just do the same thing all the time. Oh, Barb, you here?
I am. Just not in visual form.
So welcome, Barb. You know what? We'll hear you, and we'll see the little blue person, which is not as funny as the little Lego head. But we would rather be having a conversation with you than having you try and solve the technical problems. So welcome.
Thank you.
Where are you joining us from this morning, Barb?
This morning I am currently in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. But normally I am living in Walnut Creek, California for the time being.
Okay, so it's great to have you here. Meg asked me to sort of facilitate the conversation, mostly because I've known the both of you for a really long time, since both of you were young adult leaders in our movement, and I'm guessing that's probably where you two met each other too. Is that right?
Yeah, I think more or less. Elandria and I last weekend while at the board meeting were trying to figure out just when we first got to know each other, and we were in a bit of a loss. It seems like we've known each other most of our lives.
And now this is a new adventure here. So I understand that since you all were appointed co-moderators, that a lot of people are asking, like, what's that about? So I figure maybe we'll just start there. What could you tell us a little bit about, what does it mean to be co-moderators and not just single moderators, and why did we choose to go down that road of collaborative leadership?
Barbara, would you like me to start on this one?
Yes.
Right. So people should remember. So I've been on the board for about a year. I'm starting the second year on the board. And unfortunately, when we had the brouhaha go down with the president and everybody else, we talked about what it would mean to have collaborative leadership and how to really show that in our faith in a different way. Although we generally have collaborative leadership, it's not actually seen. So people are always working together behind the scenes, but you still see hierarchy from the outset, right? So people looking in wouldn't actually know the collaboration was happening. All they would see is the way the hierarchical models worked. And so we were like, well, how do we actually show that differently among the presidents, co-presidents? And so as a board, we were like, let's actually agree to have co-presidents so people could actually see and be able to relate to multiple different types of people and see how different leadership looks. And so after that happened, we were like, well, then what would that mean for moderators? So moving into General Assembly in June, we were like, how do we not just have one person have to stand up there and bear the brunt of what it meant to do this in a couple of weeks notice, but instead let's actually show collaborative leadership. I mean, let's have 3 different ones of us really be able to support each other and hold each other and see what that meant. And so then when it came time to actually have a appointed moderator, we were like, well, we like the co-moderator. That actually worked. What would that mean to do that in this form for the next couple of years? And so that's how the co-moderatorship came to be. And I think for me and Barb, it really helped. We've known each other a long time. And I think it's hard to do it if you don't actually know the people. But we also wanted to see what it would mean to make this job more manageable. We haven't figured that out yet. But what it would mean to do it as people who have either, I have a completely full-time job and over full-time job, so that people who work and have families and actually have things that they have actually other kinds of responsibilities. They're not retired, upper middle class, wealthy, and just have free time. Like, how do we make this job doable for the average person in our faith, or at least the average person in our world? And so that's part of the reason why we started talking about co-mods, forms of leadership, because we felt that it was important.
Barb, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I think Elandria encapsulates well what the board had wanted and is leading us into. I think the only thing that I would add to that is, born out of our shared leadership of the Right Relationship team several years ago, we have we've already worked out some of the how to work together piece, which in shared leadership has to be intentional to be successful. And so we've come into this both with shared experience leading together, but also we've spent a lot of time talking with one another about how to lead together, and how, not just the logistics of how to break up the work, but also how we make sure we're holding one another accountable to our promises, to good relationship, so that we can model for ourselves and everyone who's watching this what shared leadership really means.
And the only thing I would add is that we wanted to do it both amongst ourselves and with the board, right? Like, how do people actually know who the board is, not the co-mods? How do we actually have collaborative leadership in designing agendas, right? So each board meeting has a separate small team that is going to help plan the board meeting, along, of course, with Sage and Frederick Gray and Kara. Like, how do we actually do shared leadership with the administration, with the staff, with the whole board, and with us, so that, and people like in community, so it's not just like the 2 or 3 people leading, but actually we're like, how do all of us, how do we have leaderful movements? How do we have leaderful faith? And so I think that's one thing that both of us really strongly believe in, is leaderful faces.
I'm curious, not just in this situation with you and Barb, Elandria, but also with the appointment of the 3 presidents in the spring, if you heard any pushback, because we in our congregation, we're at a large church, went to a leadership team model, and there's been pushback by some who are attached to the idea that one person needs to be in charge. So I'm curious what if you did get any from both appointments pushback.
Barbara, is there anything you want to share? Or do you want me to go first?
Well, I think since you were on the board when we moved to co-presidents, it makes sense for you to speak to this.
Yeah, so I think we had pushback both inside the board and out, right? Because I think anytime you do something new, there are people who are not used to it. So, I mean, it wasn't that we came to this decision easily. I mean, we did a lot of wrestling and wrangling amongst ourselves as to what it looks like, especially among people who've never seen collaborative leadership models. And then I think once we went public with it, what I believe is because of who we chose, we get a lot of pushback. People are like, oh, Bill Sinkford, we love him. Leon, oh, wow. And so, yeah, so there's not going to be a whole bunch of public pushback. There may have been people inwardly going, I don't understand. But because they did such good communication, I mean, they really did amazing communication and call people and were really attentive. And I think the staff were like, oh, I can actually trust. These aren't 3 people that I don't know or that I'm worried about. And so I think because of their communication, because there were 3 people that across our faith, a lot of people know, that I think helped. I mean, so I will say if we had like chosen 3 people that people didn't know, then that would have been a whole nother say on. There were times when we were doing the 3 co-mod piece at GA. Some people were like, I don't understand why there's 3 of you. But by the time we got finished, most people were like, oh, I now understand why there might have been 3 of you. Because this was actually not an easy thing to do. But there was also like, there's grumblings on the side. So there were grumblings that we heard, but people don't always tell you the grumblings. But a lot of the grumblings weren't necessarily about the co-leadership. It was about other things happening around why certain things were done, but not really about the co-process.
And since you've been since your co-appointment was announced, have you heard or experienced any resistance to this new way of doing things?
I can say that I haven't experienced any resistance, but I have experienced a lot of enthusiasm and support and hope. I think that's in part the ground that was broken open by the tri-presidents and then the tri-moderators at General Assembly, but also just as we move into new understandings of what leadership is. I think that by having shared leadership in this model, it opens up the possibility for other folks who might aspire to be in leadership positions in our faith who have always thought they were inaccessible to them.
That's actually really exciting for me to hear, you know, because, you know, I know the both of you and I know how you work together, and I was really excited to hear that you had said yes to this. I was a little surprised because I know that you're both insanely busy people. So can you tell us a little bit about why and how you came to the decision to say yes to this opportunity, to this call to service? Barb, you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say one of the challenges in shared leadership is figuring out who answers first. I'm happy to, you know, for me as a lifelong Unitarian Universalist and the kid of a director of religious education, being involved in our faith movement has just not only been something I've loved to do, but also it's what I do. And you know, the last 10 years I've served as an interim director of religious education in our multiple congregations and have loved that work. And having spent 10 years prior to that serving on the UUA staff, have a love of both the big picture and the local congregation, both the rhythm of life and how it all fits in. And so for me, one of the driving things in my life is to be of service. And the vehicle I want to be of service to is the movement of Unitarian Universalism. So when I was told back at General Assembly, I was approached by the team on the board that was vetting nominations. When I was told that I had been nominated and was asked, would you accept the nomination? At that moment in time, I was ending full-time employment with the congregation that I had just been serving, Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church, and was finishing a CPE residency and had no idea what was going to be on the horizon after the end of July. And yet found my soul singing in answer to the question, would you accept the nomination? I said, of course I would accept the nomination. Had no expectation necessarily that I would be chosen. And so when I got the call saying, we want you to consider being co-moderator, and then they shared with me who they wanted to partner me with, I mean, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's like an opportunity to work with Elandria, an opportunity to move into a leadership role in a way that redefines what leadership means in our movement, to lead from a place of faith as we struggle through some really difficult pieces of how we do our work, as we break through what I hope will be breaking through models of white supremacy and systems that reinforce white supremacy, as we move into an understanding of the beloved pluralistic community that we've always said we believe in. I wanted to take all the life experience that I have, all the passion I have for the faith, and make space in my life to be able to do this work and do it well. Plus, I get to work with Elandria and all of the board and all the folks, and who could say no to that?
Elandria, you wanna give us your perspective on this? You seem to be frozen, so maybe not. I guess both of our folks are having a little technical difficulties. Meg, do you want to ask that question?
I was wondering, and I'm really sorry about that. I had a pastoral call that I'd been waiting all morning for. Aisha, did you already ask this? And if it's redundant, but I'm excited that we have a religious educator as moderator. And I just was thinking, all the gifts and skills that religious educators bring. I always say religious educators are the community organizers of our congregations. And so, Barb, I'm curious how your religious education passion and history and experience you think will feed into this.
Well, I think in a couple of ways. And so far, it seems to be one of the biggest ways that it's feeding into this is I've had, in my capacity as a director of religious education, I've had to figure out how to make groups of people move in a similar direction, even when we don't want to. And I don't mean to say that all of our other religious professionals don't do that. That said, I think there's a unique way in which religious education directors, or those of us working in religious education, have to do that. And so that's been a piece of it, is that and I want to specify that plus doing interim work. So I've now worked over the last 10 years with 5 different congregations. And that combination means that I don't have a set model of leadership in my head when I come into the room, but I have multiple models of leadership. And coming out of our youth movement and into religious professionalism, again, it comes back to this shared leadership that even when we set a hierarchical system on paper, it doesn't mean that the tip of the pyramid has to be the dominating leader at all times, but rather shared leadership means we all come with our specialties and we all have something to contribute to the conversation. And I think that education teaches us to do that well, and directing in religious education teaches us to make space for those multiple experiences to come forward more.
I always say, a minister can have a crappy Sunday and it's too bad, but if the religious educator doesn't get a ton of people where they need to be, the whole place falls apart. So
true.
It is finding people with a different level of urgency, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and there's something about when you're in charge of minors, right? There's that whole other layer of feeling of responsibility in the moment that I think helps. Yeah, urgency is a great word. And having clarity about when things are truly urgent and when it's important to slow down and make sure everybody is with us.
And you learn flexibility real quick. I mean, I think one of the things that's I've said to folks who are not familiar with the ins and outs of being a religious educator is we, by nature of having to recruit people to be part of the program, have to be savvy and kind. And so by I've heard, sometimes like ministers will do, their worship and then go into coffee hour for 10 minutes and then head off somewhere and be able to disappear. We don't have the luxury of disappearing when you're a religious educator. I know I shouldn't call that a luxury, but by nature of our job, we have to be on top of always being in many, many relationships all the time in order for the program to be successful.
So true.
So it looks like we have Elandria back with us. I'm hoping the two of you can talk a little bit about your vision and your hopes for what this co-moderator position will mean, and I hope that we'll get a little bit into how you two are like shaking up our governance a little bit. Elandria, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm got you on another thing. I'm trying to get.
Which Elandria? There are several of them.
That's the secret of how we're doing our work, just for the record.
Okay.
That would
Can you hear me
explain a
now?
lot over the of the things that I've known in the many years that I've known Elandria. That would actually explain that there are two of you. Would actually explain a lot.
So, first question before, and I can go back to the first
So
one, the second
Bishop,
one, and answer them.
saying yes, that's right.
Yeah, because I think it's actually really important. So, when we were in the midst of this, the reason I said yes to actually doing the tribe mod and stepped up is because I knew there needed to be somebody that people knew would like have certain people's backs and was like very clear around what it meant to be an anti-racist human being, very clear about what it meant to be a person of color and Black, right? And clear around like we are not letting that go. And so that folks knew that they could like call me if stuff was going on. And I think that that's not always been true in our leadership, right? People have had to do go-arounds and not actually believe that you could call and talk to the person that's actually in leadership at that moment. You've had to go, we've had, like I know I've been the drum GA coordinator, for people have had to come to me, then I had to go to somebody else. And so I was like, how do we actually shift that? And when I was talking to somebody randomly in a hot tub at GA around like who should do it, and they were like, well, why don't you do it? I was like, oh, that's funny. Anyway, and so I was like, oh, that's cute. That won't happen. That's fine. But in the end, I realized, one, it's hard to do this position without having been on the board before. And I was like, how in the world do we just ask somebody to be the interim and not have support from somebody that's actually been on the board that was around during any of it? I actually think it's really unfair of what we do to people that are moderators. It's very unfair to me because it's like you come in, half the groom has actually been around, and then you're coming in brand new. And so I think that's one thing for me where I'm like, okay, how is that in itself like an unfair situation for people to place in? Because we don't, everywhere I've ever been, the chair of the board comes from the board. Even if they're elected, they still have been on the board in some way. And so that's one of the reasons why I said yes. And with the Commission on Institutional Change, which I helped do the charge and some of the other stuff that have to happen in our faith, I was like, how do we help shepherd this process forward? And somebody that people know they can call at any moment and will listen and understands what it has meant to fight inside and out. And I think like I also wanted to have good facilitated board meetings that weren't dull. And that you felt like they were front and center in the process, and people who hadn't been heard before could feel heard. So those are some of the reasons why for me it was important. So I think in terms of vision, it's a very similar thing, right? How do people feel? The people who've been pushed out, I've been pushed out a couple times. So for people who've been pushed out, how do they feel like they actually matter inside, right? How do we actually hold like Unitarian Universalism, really? How do we have a faithful governance model? Because it hasn't always been faithful. How do we have relationships with the staff and administration that are fruitful and generative and powerful and beautiful and not adversarial? And so it's like, how do we actually do the work of figuring out where we want to go? I mean, we've got a 2-year process of like bylaws and principles and purposes and articles. We got all kinds of stuff. The commission. And so in the next 2 years, we've got to shepherd with all of our people. Where are we trying to go? Look like both people who are in congregations and people who aren't. People who have been born and raised and have Unitarian Universalism tattooed on their body, but can't find a congregation to them that feeds their soul, right? So how do all those folks feel like they are actually wanted, needed, and honored in this process for us to craft the faith that we hope and long for? And I'm also someone who like came in at the 3rd grade. So like I chose it in the 2nd grade, but it's been a long time, right? So I'm pretty much a lifer. 2nd grade is pretty early on. And so just like as a person who chose it in the 2nd grade and someone who's been around forever, like what does that look like for me to find myself in our faith, self in the structures? And I'll say that somebody who questions every day whether I'm like a sellout or an institutionalist because of like what it means to be in this space. It's also like, how can we be in this and inside without feeling like we've sold out? And that's on every front, right? And also, how do we do forgiveness? Because it's we're a very small body of people, really. And a lot of us have had very long relationships in which we've been hurt, in which we've done things that hurt others. And how do we move through all of that and creating who we want to be? And I think that to me is part of the vision for me of where we want to go. And it's like we've been in the valley and we're going to be in the valley, but how in the valley can we beautiful come out? And so that's kind of my vision for like where we could be and where we could go. And to me, process is as important as a destination. So in our destination, how do we also craft process where people feel like they're included in and that their opinions matter? And so like one example is at the board meeting this time, we did not have observers. We had fellow Unitarian Universalists and people participated in the board meeting and they checked in and they checked out because they're like, people aren't just there watching us, they are of us. And so how do we actually craft a whole different way of being that actually honors all of us? And so, yeah, Barb, where you at? What you think?
All of what you just said.
You want to add to that in any way, Barb?
No, how could I possibly add to that?
You have half the voice of our moderator team, so we, you know. I think it's striking to me as someone who's served on the board. In my time on the board, you know, there was the board table, and there were lots more people at that table, and then there were the observers who physically sat somewhere else, unless they were brought to the table. Like, I mean, it was not even just a mental exercise of othering. It was a physical exercise of othering. So I'm really interested that you ran the meetings differently. Can you tell me a little more about how that went?
Yeah, I can jump in with that. You know, and I think to say that that othering is a piece of the white supremacist culture, right? Controlling who is at the table and who is not at the table. So let's just name that for what it is. And to say that there are times where it's helpful to have clarity about who has the power to make the decisions in terms of formal vote and who doesn't. But that doesn't mean that all of us in the room, or what I mean to say is that all of us in the room have information and can be helpful to the conversation. And so there were many times in this past board retreat where those who were quote unquote observers were invited into small groups, either integrated into the whole. So it was the entire collective of human beings broken into small groups. And there were times where those small groups were specific to professional track or life experience or role in the room. But I found that there was a richness to the conversation that happened because of all of those multiple voices. And our hope is that those who were with us, whether that be in person in the room or in the moments where we were technologically able to bring, you know, those of you who weren't physically in the room into the room through technology, my hope is that it felt as rich and engaging for everyone as it did for us as the co-moderators.
So
Yeah, and I think we're trying. Oh,
go ahead, Ellen.
go ahead, Meg. No, go ahead.
Okay, well, you just hit some fear for me, and I'm going, oh, that's interesting. So I thought I'd name it. Like, because I've, over the years, watched some voices in the room that get real loud and take a lot of attention from the side that aren't helpful voices at all. And I was like, I mean, it's interesting. You're like, this is white supremacist. And I'm like, maybe, but it's like hitting my buttons, you know? So, I mean, that's just really, I'm like, part of me is like, that's cool. And part of me is like, So I figure if I'm hitting that, I'm sure I'm the oldest person here today. If I'm hitting that, so are a bunch of other people. So I'm just wondering, I mean, this is big change, big changes. And I'm curious, like, there will be times when you'll want to silence voices on the edges. Trust me, I know some of these voices, right? I mean, you know, we have people who want to stop the movement that, you know, so I'm just curious, you're just trust. It sounds like you have a lot more trust in our movement than I do. That's what I'm hearing.
So I don't actually believe in silencing voices. So I want to actually say this because I think people don't understand. So part of what it means to have done anti-racism, anti-oppression training for so many years, because actually that's how I got started doing national work in our movement. I was like 15 years old on a transformation team. I was the youngest person other than Leslie Takahashi, who is a good 20 years older than me. right? And the thing that I've learned and what has gone wrong with our anti-racism, anti-oppression work is that we don't build relationships. So it meant that I came into Concentric, which is how I met Michael, and talked to every person there. That was 250 people, one-on-one. What it meant is that 3 years, 2 years later, there were nobody, people may not have wanted to be in the room, but guess what? They were there. And they weren't causing a whole bunch of catastrophe because they could actually say, this is my challenge. My challenge is you're telling me I'm white, I'm Polish, I don't understand what you were talking about because we are not white yet. And I'm like, you're right, you're not. You people did not assimilate all the way. You have white skin privilege, but you do not assimilate all the way. Let's talk about what that means for you. And so I think part of the thing is we are used to being in the world and being silenced. And so the question for me is always, how do I honor who you are? And you are not going to disrupt the process. So people don't disrupt my processes often. They just don't. Maybe I'm just like off the chain and I'm like, no, you're not going to do that today, boo. And so part of it is how do we build deep group agreements? So we spend a lot of time doing group agreements out of actual scenarios. Here are ways that we have moved. Not work. What is the agreements we want to build around it? So some of the group agreements we did just like as a board and executive session, but then we landed on the hard ones actually in public. Some of the hardest ones we did in public. And we asked the people who were our fellow Unitarian Universalists to do, what do you want from the board in terms of communication? So it's not that they were deciding how we need to do conflict of interest or how we do whatever, but it's like, can you all actually say how you want us to relate to you? So that when we move forward, we are hearing from you. The ability to actually do deep covenantal group agreements. Most times we do a covenant that is flowery. To do group agreements out of struggle and actually say we are going to hold each other accountable to them. And when we go awry, this is what it means. That's how you hold people, right? And so I think that is what it means to hold each other. When we are like, here is how we're going to hold each other through the struggle. And most people that I see go awry are doing so out of pain and trauma. They feel some sense of loss. And so how people can hold like, I'm sensing feeling loss. Oh my gosh, I'm feeling loss. And how we say, I know you're feeling a sense of loss, but let's minister that. And let's have a spiritual moment around the fact that we're all feeling loss. Now let's move spiritually together. And I think that's what it means to do governance spiritually. So like so people have said GA this year, what the call out looks very faith rooted. It's like, yes, maybe you missed the memo, but we are not a secular organization, right? I have member of lots of those. So how do we hold our faith, as interesting as it is, in all that, right? And so I think that to me is the thing. And it's not that, and like Barb was saying, it's not that we're all at the table together, but it does mean that we value each other just on where they're coming from. And it's like, here's our time. This is our time clock. We are not going over this time. Here's how long you get to talk. So I'm like, you get 35 seconds. Ding, ding, ding. When your 35 seconds is done, thank you for talking. We love you. Moving on. And so I think we have to also like do different forms and methodological ways of being. And so most people were like, this is a board meeting, unlike any board meeting I've ever seen, because we did a Highlander style board meeting where like we actually started from people's experience and then built from it. Right? It wasn't we're just going to sit around the table and pontificate for 45 minutes while we go round and around and around and around and around. Right? And so I think like that's the other piece. It's like we invite people in within time frames, but then this is the agreements we all have with each other, and this is how we're going to be. And if we don't be this way, how do we hold each other in that? That's all I would say, because I feel like I've seen a lot of, and so I think silencing is white supremacist. And I think that like the othering, you cannot other in a faith. Like you can other in a multinational corporation, but you should not be othering in like in a place that's trying to be not capitalist and trying to be in a different form. And I think our sources of our authority halfway are our members. Like we are a membership-based institution. And I think we sometimes forget that and we don't move that way. And that's a long answer, so I'm sorry for talking so long. But I think like how we hold our people as like the bearers of our faith is really important. And I would say I feel like we're having a principles conversation around the 8th principle and this principle and that principle, not because of the words, whatever. It's because we don't implement and enact them correctly. people didn't learn what I learned in the 3rd grade about our principles, right? So like maybe we have to do a better job of adult RE so that everyone understands what they mean in implementation. And so like, I think that's the thing, is like, how do we implement, not just have words? And because I think that's actually one of the fears moving forward, is that people will think that we're in like a wordsmithing process around our principles and our bylaws and all the things, but in we're actually in an implementation process.
Okay, so now I have 2 things I want to add to that. But on that wordsmithing versus implementation piece, I just want to say that I wish, right, this is just me, Barb, not necessarily in my role as co-moderator, as if those are inseparable, but I wish that we could have substantive conversations around what we mean about the spirit of and the intent of our principles, and not get into the wordsmithing, right? Let's leave it up to trusting that a core team of people who are, I don't know, professional wordsmithers could do the wordsmithing part for us, and we could actually have the conversation about what do we want the guiding principles of our faith to be, and how do we want to live those out? So I just want to name that because you ended on that. But I actually want to go back to, Meg, your statement. And one of the hardest things I think sometimes we experience as leaders is that leap of faith that moves us out of our own way to not want to limit the voices or silence the voices. And that is about how we share leadership, and not just leadership in the hierarchical, who have we chosen as the official named leaders, but also what voices or what ideas are allowed to be presented and not. One of the challenges I had is that I came into this role with no experience on our board. I wasn't on the board like Elandria was last year. So I'm that half of the co-moderatorship that's coming in without any of the history from the table, and having a need to build relationships both with those at the table and other major stakeholders and minor stakeholders, all the stakeholders, building all of the relationships. So how do I relax into that and let go of my presumptions of and expectations of how it used to be in order to let it be what it can be? And for me, that's the place where the immediacy of the moment and our lived experience and privilege bump into each other. And sometimes it takes one another saying, dude, you are totally getting in the way of this process. And this is where the long relationship that Elandria and I have with one another will benefit our leadership, and that we can say that to one another. And we can say it directly and in love. And it's not like we've always gotten along or always thought the same thing. And so one of the values that we have is the ability to come at things from different perspectives, and ironically and thankfully often landing in the same place. But also holding one another accountable to that type of leadership that says it's important that all of the people that have access to this meeting are sharing their opinions, and we need to find a way to get the opinions of the people who aren't in the room. And that's not always comfortable. And I think part of being a good leader is learning to sit with that discomfort.
Can I respond? I just wanted to say thank you, Elandria. You gave me back something I never thought I'd get back in this faith. Thank you.
You want to say more, Meg, or you good?
Well, I came in with this radical feminist, anti-hierarchy that's really gotten, as a religious educator, which is still primarily how I identify in the world, which really has not been, even though so much work was done around it in the 70s and stuff, it just got knocked off track, and we turned into this rigid kind of policy governance, and that's just broken my heart. And so to hear you talk about the world I know of one-to-ones and what, personal relationships, and it's like, oh my God, I never put that here. I just partitioned it off because it was too painful. So when you started to talk, I could feel this kind of like heart melting thing going on. It was really exciting about, and I think that the fear that I voiced, and part of why I voiced it is, I'm somebody who basically loves change, but I'm seeing a lot of people my age, and I'm 61, who are really getting very scared about being sidelined and no longer in charge. And, and it's, my God, it's a very late handover compared to any other organizations I've been involved with to finally have a Gen Xer. Most organizations I know did that 10 years ago, but I feel like all of this change is happening kind of simultaneously. And yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. So I just like, yay. And like, yeah, my fear probably is representative of a lot of old white people right there.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that I lament and I've said is, I feel like Unitarian Universalists, Unitarian Universalism has not served our people well by not helping us sit in discomfort. And so even from the spectrum of ordained minister of 30 years to, you know, someone who just came in wondering what this is all about, everyone is having not everyone, most white people, I will say, have made this the faith of their own comfort and feeling good doing outward social justice. And hey, we're not only such social justice warriors, UUs are full of white saviors. And so when now the role is, well, actually, let's look at our part in this, all of, or how do we need to change? There's just immense discomfort. And I've had a conversation with a friend about how white male ministers are feeling displaced. And so I totally honor that needs to be, and as Elandria, you said earlier, like, let's move together spiritually. Yes, this is hard and painful, and it also will enrich us. We will, you know, I don't know who said this, Oprah, but it's like Oprah-esque, like, what doesn't break us will make us stronger. And I think, as hokey as that sounds, I completely believe that is true. And so we can move through this discomfort together. We don't have to fall apart. We don't have to fight and argue. We don't have to close in on ourselves. We can do that. I genuinely believe we can do this, and we do have to be intentional about it. And both Barb and Elandria spoke to that, and with intention. And Elandria, it was a stroke of genius that the board chose the 3 people that they did, because I completely agree that if it was any other people, it would not have been as successful as it was. And so it was almost a pastoral choice of, you know, gold standards. So thank you for that.
So I'm wondering, we have about 12 minutes left. If we can talk like governance for a second, because I know our bylaws. I served on our board, and I know that there are things that are in the way of some of the things that the 2 of you are talking about, and some of the things that are in the way are bylaws that are in the way. So I'm wondering if there's a path forward to change that, to address it, or to start addressing it. Like, I don't even know where you start. And I know, Barb, I met you when you were rewriting the bylaws for the Continental UU Young Adult Network. So, and Elandria, you and I have worked on governance things enough that I know the 2 of you know what you're doing here. So, Barb, you want to start with that?
Sure, and I'm going to say this jokingly and yet somewhat true. Elandria and I have already been dreaming up, like, if we could be the ones to rewrite the bylaws, as if there weren't a very clearly articulated process. But yeah, you know, our bylaws are both cumbersome and helpful. I look at bylaws as an ethical statement for how an organization dreams it can be. And I think that's how bylaws often start. And then as circumstances arise, that we add to bylaws to become more and more restrictive. And so one of the challenges that I think we as a faith movement are facing is how much of what our historical, not even historical, how much of our bylaws are based in a historical way of doing things that don't serve our mission anymore. And, you know, that said, it takes a couple of years minimum to get bylaws changed. And that's assuming that you have everybody on board from the beginning with no contention. And as we all know, VUUs like to argue points. Sometimes I wonder if just for the sake of arguing. And so this is my way of urging all of us who are listening, when we start actually doing the work of changing bylaws, we consider again the spirit and not the wordsmithing piece of it. But that said, you know, our bylaws require a single moderator. So let's just start at that very place of, we're designed to systematically ensure that there's a hierarchical structure in our leadership. Ironic in a movement that says We want to do shared leadership and don't believe in hierarchy. And then we can also look at a singular president. So here we are in a moment of our history where, because of unfortunate circumstances, the board had the authority to appoint, and in that appointment could lift up or could broaden our understanding of what the bylaws mean. And so we've still had to find ways to work it through. And our bylaws are going to need to be shifted and changed, not just in terms of, how many presidents or how many moderators, but also what's the makeup of the board? Who's the executive committee? What's the authority? As we move more and more into policy governance, if that's where we choose to stay, then the question becomes, are our bylaws written for the best use of our staff time, the best use of our volunteer time? Or is it based in a model that doesn't take into account modern understandings of shared leadership? How's that for a roundabout, not direct answer?
I think that's a great answer. And so the only thing I'd add, and then I can say what anybody can say they will say, is that there's also, I think, one thing we've been talking around the difference between policy governance and decision making, and that policy governance is like a framework, right? I mean, every single large institution I've been connected to does a form of policy-based governance, because you can't actually do kitchen table and they're all hybrids. They're all some hybrid policy governance structure if they're international and national boards. And so I think getting over the are we going to be policy-based? Yes. I mean, because we're a national board. But how that looks doesn't have to be the same. And how we decision make doesn't have to be the same. And so we're in a 2-year bylaw process. So I hope everyone is ready. So General Assembly this year, we're going to actually be talking around, what do we want from our faith? What do we want our bylaws and principles to be? What does that mean for how we do governance? What are our hopes and dreams? And what does that look like on a national level? But then what does it also look like on our congregational level and in covenanted communities? What does all that mean? And how do those things relate to each other? And the hope is in 2019, we can have a completely brand new bylaws. And so I hope everyone's ready, because we're doing a 2019 bylaw vote. But we're hoping to really do an organizing process where we reach out to people. And so we're running it almost like an organizing campaign of how do we reach out to everyone that we need to across the board. And so we invite everyone to join in this process of crafting who we want to be and how we want to be, and how does our bylaws, principles, purposes actually help us get there, and allow for non-static forms of being, and allows for innovation and shifting and how we navigate what it means to be in 2017, 2019, and then 2025, right? How do we be able to be a little bit more nimble? And as of now, we've tried to figure out what that means in terms of interpretation, to how to be nimble, but it's also how do we actually create structures and systems that allow that nimbleness, that also hold us accountable too, so that if we go too far over one way or the other, that they bring us back into line.
It occurs to me that this is really exciting, and it also has the potential to filter down and change the way congregations do Unitarian Universalism. Jane Spickett on our chat earlier asked about models of collaborative leadership in congregations, and it wasn't our topic, so we didn't bring it up, and maybe we can do a VUU show on that at some point too. But I'm wondering if either of the two of you, Elandria or Barb, has a thought about how you would like the work that you're doing to be received and internalized by our congregations, and how they do leadership. Do you have a vision for that or a thought, Elandria? You're nodding your head. I can't see if Barb is nodding his head, so I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I'm just trying to talk a minute or less, and Barb, you should definitely go. Yes, I think that one thing for me is, as someone who grew up UU and who goes to various churches, is that I feel like our churches don't all look like they are Unitarian Universalists together. It feels sometimes like I've gone from one faith to another, one way of being to another, and it's very confusing. And so I think a lot of people would like some sort of I have walked into a UU church. I can feel like I've walked into a UU church. I feel like I'm at a UU national gathering, because I remember the first time I went to GA, I felt like I was in a completely different universe than my local congregation, which was very disheartening to say the least. And so I think that I think this is why it's really important that the conversation is with congregations and can cut it into communities and individuals, so that whatever shifts we are making is that half the time I get called into local UU congregations around because I do this work in my life, right? It's helping people do democratic governance, not at Highland or their spaces is, can you help us do democratic governance in my local congregation? We have no idea how to strategically plan with democratic governance. We don't know how to do some of these very things. And so to me, part of what it means to do things at a national level is set models. And so my hope is that in this process, we can model for people what shared leadership looks like. We can model for people what democratic governance means, and that we can actually like maybe even have some like codification of like, this is how we did this. If you're thinking about doing this, these are examples of how congregations have done it and communities have done it and what you could do. And then people can also share with us what we've done in our congregations that may be something to try. Because I think it's also reciprocal, right? So people are doing things in fellowships and congregations all over the country and the world that might actually be very useful for us to learn to help shift what we're doing nationally.
Yes, to all of what Elandria just said, and I think it's a time of experimentation. That if nothing else, and we've learned this best from our youth movements, and we're both products of our youth movement, is it's okay to experiment. And as Karen Bell Vance Grace coined in her work for Full Week Faith, expera learn, that we move into new and shared leadership models to learn from them. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all model, just like there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all model of Unitarian Universalism. And yet, there has to be some commonalities, whether that's through shared ritual or shared hymnology or shared leadership, that there has to be some things that bind us together beyond just we say we're Unitarian Universalists, and how we lead is a part of that.
Wow, y'all, this has been really exciting. And, you know, unlike you geeks in the room, I'm not a policy-oriented person. And yet, you know, so when I hear bylaws, part of me just nods off and says, wake me up when you're done. But you make it exciting. And that means that I think GA will be really exciting as we process it together. I hope maybe you'll come back as the year unfolds and you know, you can share more about what's going on, because I think you're both wonderful models of new leadership, new ways of thinking, expera learning, all of that, and it's so aligned with my faith. So thank you. I think for the faith. So I'm just going to speak for Unitarian Universalism here, and thank you both.
Hey, better you than us.
Yes, thank you.
I think I'm safe in saying this for the complete co-mods. We would be delighted to come back. This has been a fantastic conversation, and we can only lead as well as we can lead if we stay in relationship with you all, not just those of you that are asking us the questions, but all of you who are tuning into this show either here live or later at your on your time frame.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Barb. All right, well, next week we're going to talk about music and cultural misappropriation and all kinds of stuff with that, with at least for sure we have Dero Farrar talking and hopefully some other folks too about music, which is absolutely critical as we move forward. So excited about that. And meanwhile, may everybody fight the good fight. We got plenty to get out there and fight about and plenty to get out there and celebrate about. So heal yourself, heal the world. Take care.
Amen.